Hello, and welcome to the ALN 2020 Asset Leadership Forum, reStructuring America. I'm Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm very excited to be starting off today, our last day of the 2020 Asset Leadership Forum, with this panel and event, The Path Forward with Asset Leadership. Two notes before we get started. We have been getting interest in the ALN approach to asset leadership and asset management. So I just wanted to take a moment to let all of you panelists and attendees know that we do have a 2-week web course leading to ALN A55K professional certification starting on November 9th. So you can see our website, assetleadership.net, for more information on that. And one final note before we begin. If you're watching out there, we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to send any comments or questions to the chat of this Zoom webinar. There's also a Q&A function. And if you feel comfortable putting your questions or comments in there, that will work as well. Mike Bordenero and myself will be paying attention to that. And now without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Jack Kelly, ALN Senior Fellow and formerly with the OMB for 36 years. Jack?
Thanks, Nick. So it's my privilege today to introduce Peter Kohler, but before I introduce Peter, I need to tell you a story about how I actually met Peter. Michael Hardy and Michael will be moderating a panel following Peter's discussion. About 3 years ago, we started on a white paper looking at the history of asset management. And so, as any good researcher would do, I went to Google and I put in asset management, and up comes an article on infrastructure asset management that mentions a woman named Dr. Penny Burns in Australia as being one of the early leaders of asset management. So I went to LinkedIn and I found Dr. Burns, had a really nice conversation with her. She gave a lot of early history of her involvement with asset management. And then I said, well, so Dr. Burns, so what's going on in Australia today? She said, well, the person you have to talk to about that is Peter Kohler. Peter Kohler is like in the center of a lot of what's going on in Australia, and he's the best guy to talk to. So I reached out to Peter. We had a number of really interesting conversations, and Peter turned out to be a major contributor to the paper that Michael and I were writing. I mean, he in fact told me more about the history of the United States involvement or the evolution of asset management in the United States than I had learned from anybody in the United States, which was kind of interesting to me. But that's not the end of the story. At the end of the paper that Michael and I wrote, there was a section on where around the world was asset management being, or I should say ISO 55000 being implemented. And what was interesting there was that there were 4 countries that stood out: Japan, the Netherlands, Australia, and the UK. They had like 10 times more certified organizations than anybody else. So a year or so later, I got interested in following up on that and learned that I became actually fascinated with the question, what is it about these 4 countries that has caused this much greater adoption of ISO 55000? And that got me to take a closer look at those 4 countries, which brought me back to Australia. And so I shared a paper with Peter, and he gave me lots of great information. And then about a year ago, I learned about the national infrastructure plan for Australia, and then subsequently a state, the New South Wales infrastructure plan. And I thought, oh my God, a national infrastructure plan is what the United States desperately needs, but we're not. We're just not set up to do that. So yet. Now, that's one of the things that the National Asset Leadership Strategy is trying to work toward, but we're not there. We hope we're on a good path. But anyway, I thought, well, the best person to talk about why Australia is where it is Peter Kohler. He was in the middle of a lot of why it is where it is today. And so with that, I would like to introduce Peter Kohler and ask him to tell us more about this. Peter?
Well, thank you very much, Jack. Excuse me, I'm a little embarrassed, actually. I don't often get that way, but a little embarrassed with your introduction. But that aside, thank you very much for the opportunity and the Leadership Network, the opportunity to have a chat to everyone this morning. For me, I think for most people watching this this presentation, it's a reasonable time of day. For me, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't say that for any other reason that when I'm an engineer by background, and I spent many years in the Navy. And when I was training as an engineer in the Navy, you had to do a lot of watch keeping. And the worst watch to keep was the morning watch, which was 4 till 8 in the morning. So I congratulate the Asset Leadership Network in picking the worst time of day for me, from a number of emotional reasons, apart from the physical reason of being 4 o'clock in the morning too. That aside, I hope I can do the presentation justice. So let me talk my way through that, and I look forward to your questions and observations afterwards as well on completion. You can all see the title, I'm presuming, title slide, the development path through an integrated set of national and state infrastructure plans. Before I get into detail, I need to introduce myself a little.
Peter, we're not seeing the title slide.
You're not seeing the title slide?
Yes, we're not seeing the title slide. And if you give it one more try, then I can try it as well. Ah, there we go.
Is that better?
We're seeing it now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for interrupting. Yep.
No problem.
Okay. Yes, so now you can see the title slide, and I'll go through the slides. Introducing myself a little bit more detail, it is relevant to the conversation. I don't normally talk about myself at the beginning other than read the slide, but a few points about that. I'm a mechanical engineer by background, joined the Navy from high school, spent quite a few years in the Navy, and as I just alluded to, and that's where I started my asset management journey, actually. We perhaps talk about that later on, but I was actually, to be honest, quite professionally challenged by some of the things that were happening at the time in Navy, and I learned that I found out that I didn't know as much as I thought, and so I spent a lot of time learning about those things, and it all comes down to this subject and this discipline called asset management. I've been a certified fellow in asset management now for about 12 years. I'm in relation to the Asset Management Council, I am now the Executive Liaison Commissioner. My job is to get people talking. That's all. Get people, 2 or 3 groups of people, 2 or 3 people talking. I am the immediate past Body of Knowledge Commissioner. The word commissioner means you're commissioned on behalf of the board of the Asset Management Council to, in my job as a Body of Knowledge Commissioner, was to approve all the technical content, through all the documentation and other things in relation to the discipline of asset management. As a result of that, I ended up being on the 251 ISO 251 Asset Management Committee, which set up the ISO standards, developed the ISO standards, and that's, of course, where I met Jim Dieter and lots of other people, Boudewijn as well. I am now a member of the International Electrotechnical Commission, Technical Committee number 56, Dependability. Dependability has about 67 standards. I'll repeat myself, 67 standards. Why do I think that's important? Because they're all the how-to standards. How do you do asset management? I'm going to talk a little about these things throughout the slide, or mention them. So it's actually relevant for me to introduce myself in the way that I just have. Okay. Introducing the Asset Management Council very briefly. It's a significant part of the background to the subject of setting up infrastructure plans within Australia. More about that shortly, of course, but the introducing the Asset Management Council, its vision is enabling benefits for all from the use of assets. It's quite interesting, the language here. You don't get benefit from assets, you get benefit from the use of assets. So the use of, we think, is very important, just that phrase, the use of assets. A bit of background about the council itself. It started out in life in 1992 as the Maintenance Engineering Society of Australia, and it was associated with the Institution of Engineers, the premier body within Australia that looked after engineering, or the discipline of engineering. In 2004, it transformed itself into the Asset Management Council. Another story for another day of why and how, but it was unanimous. Unanimous change, the leadership and the membership. We're all keen to make that change. We're a member-based, industry-funded, registered not-for-profit professional association, independent by constitution, you can read the rest of the slide there. We are still a technical society of the Engineers Australia, although that relationship is a bit loose now. We are able to act independently. And importantly, for our presentation this morning too, my presentation this morning too, the Asset Management Council is industry agnostic. There are many organisations asset management focused organisations, which are focused on particular industries. We, as a council, are industry agnostic. So we say all our approaches apply to every industry within Australia and of course elsewhere as well. Our mission is to create broad awareness, nurture a common understanding of asset management, and provide a portal to asset management knowledge and resources. Okay, that's a quick introduction in terms of what it is we do. The sorts of things that the Asset Management Council, a bit more detail about the Asset Management Council. You can read the slide here in terms of membership and income. What I really want to highlight in this slide is industry. Since changing from the Maintenance Engineering Society to the Asset Management Council, what is really interesting to us is that well over 200 commercial and government organisations have a relationship, either commercial or work in kind, with the Asset Management Council. One of the things we try and do is engage with organisations. We're not just after sponsorship. We actually want to work together to create things that will improve our membership. Our goal is always to help our members understand and apply asset management really well. So we're always looking for partnerships to do work together. Yeah, and that's why the phrase, when we talk about nationally, how do we work together? We work together with all other Australian asset management focused organisations, and here are just some. Most of you won't understand the acronyms. It really doesn't matter for the time being, other than for me to say that the IPWEA is a municipal organisation that focuses on councils, municipal councils, the engineering side of that. Ausroads is, I think, what it says, or looking after all the national roads, and they have affiliations, of course, with all the states in Australia in terms of maintaining and operating roads. The WASA and the WASA and the WSA are water organisations, look after water nationally in Australia. One collects the water and the other one distributes. So I'm not going to get into detail, but my point is that our goal is to work with all these other organisations, and you'll hear this over and over again in our presentation today. My presentation today, it's about working with people. Internationally, we're certainly involved in ISO. There are quite a number. We make a point of working in the ISO community, not just on 251. 251, of course, just to repeat, is about the ISO 55000 standard. We do have other people working on systems engineering and other aspects of ISO. We do have a team working with the IEC, as I mentioned before. I'm there, but there's others as well, particularly Technical Committee 56. There are other IEC domains, committees which we have members working on. Risk is one, ISO 31000, and a couple of others. We're certainly involved in the Global Forum on Maintenance and Asset Management, as I'm sure most of you online would know. On a personal note, I was the representative from the Asset Management Council that attended the meeting in London, as it turned out, for the creation of the Global Forum. Another interesting story, why that came about, interesting story for some other time, not today. In terms of international working with other groups, you can just see some of the flavour there of what the Asset Management Council does. A focus for today, of course, is on this, and the slide, you can all see the slide now. This is Australia's national infrastructure plan. It was published in 2016. And along the bottom of the slide now, you can see the preface there. It sets out the infrastructure challenges and opportunities Australia faces over the next 15 years and the solutions required. And you can read the rest of that. I just wanted to say that I'm not surrounding this infrastructure plan is how does it happen? Well, it happened because there is a consensus from political parties, from many organisations around Australia. I mean, the input into a national infrastructure plan comes from many sources, from the private sector, from government sector, and so on. So this document represents a consensus view. The government, whilst the national government pays for this, it is overarchingly a consensus view. That doesn't mean that everything in the plan will actually happen. But however, it provides a guiding framework for national governments and state governments to work within. There's always going to be some challenges how things are done, but overarchingly behind all this is that consensus view. This national plan is actually supported by, as Jack Kelly said in the introduction, a number of state-based plans, and this is one. I'm not going to show you all of them. There are various states of degree of quality, I have to say, but the bigger states in Australia, which are Victoria and New South Wales, have put a lot of effort into it and use it, and all the governments, the state governments, use these things quite a lot to guide their decisions on where to spend money in relation to developing Australia. In other words, the infrastructure strategy. Here you can see that the front page of the New South Wales, the state of New South Wales, which is on the east coast of Australia, which includes where I am now in Sydney. And you can, if you read the bottom of this, the paragraph on the bottom, and you may or may not be able to read it, so because of the colouring, but I'll read it out to you. It says, this 20-year strategy sets out Infrastructure New South Wales independent advice on the current state of New South Wales infrastructure and the needs and priorities over the next 20 years. So really quite a lot of interesting things that sentence talks about. Infrastructure New South Wales is a government agency. It's paid for by the government, yet it delivers independent advice to government. Once again, there's generally speaking consensus on their advice and this strategy and plan. I'm sure all of us can point to where various flavors of government might want to change a bit of emphasis, but overarchingly there is a consensus view on how these things are put together and the application of these strategies. These strategies include, quite obviously, many of the commercial aspects of Australia. So how do the ports work? How do the ports connect to all the other parts of Australia? How do they connect with all the transport agencies? All those sorts of things is all part of that infrastructure strategy. And I do want to say that allied with these plans, has been a move in the last 15 years within governments in Australia to think a bit more broadly about things. When I was a young man, 20 years ago, and if you want to take a trip in Sydney, you'd actually using public transport, you'd go and maybe you should train or a bus or drive or a taxi, or sometimes even if you want to risk yourself 20 years ago, ride a bike. Nowadays, and they were all different agencies that essentially competed with everyone in the organisation, and it was very common 20 years ago for rail to compete with road and road to compete with rail and saw each other that way. Nowadays, that is not the case. All transport now comes under one cluster. And so there's an overarching structure given to the whole transport, the state of transport in all the states, most of the states in Australia. So there's been associated with the development of these infrastructure strategies and plans has been a move within government to realise that you shouldn't think of roads and rail as separate. You should think of them as a coordinated set of activities. You probably recognise that phrase, coordinated set of activities. Well, that comes from the definition of what is asset management from the ISO 55001 standard. So that's a bit of a background to these documents. I just want to say yet again that these are consensus-based, commercial, government. Everyone has a voice to play. Everyone has a voice in the development of these strategies. They're put together in this instance by Infrastructure New South Wales, an independent body to the government, even though it's paid for by the government. So its costs are borne by the New South Wales government. You can see on the left-hand side some of the things that the strategy addresses. And you can see asset management there. Asset management is a core activity of this plan. So asset management as a discipline needs to be the plan. One of the things that the strategy talks about is the application of asset management throughout all of government and throughout the private industry as well. So it sets the scene for the application of asset management as discipline throughout much of Australia's infrastructure, and of course then leads on into all the businesses that support that, or indeed are supported by that. Well, how did all that come about? And that sounds really nice. Maybe I'm gilding the lily too much. I'm sure some critics will say that about me in terms of what I say about those documents. But in general, what I said I believe is true. How did all that happen? Well, I go back to the 1980s and 1990s. Jack Kelly mentioned Dr. Penny Burns, and she's an economist by background, many times I've thought about why it is that Australia, the same question that Jack was on about, why is Australia really actually quite okay relatively? Most of us would argue it needs a long way to go, but the relatively okay in terms of the application of asset management as a discipline. And I put it down to some of the things that happened in the 1980s and maybe before that Dr. Penny Burns was actually involved with, and others who are I don't know about, but certainly I know Penny Burns. And that the first one is the mandatory adoption of accrual accounting. I'm going to talk about some of these aspects a little later on. Accrual accounting and asset management are twins. Asset management and accrual accounting need each other to work, to be blunt, because they're philosophically aligned. As I've remarked there, accrual accounting, to me, remarkably, accrual accounting is not mandatory. Generally speaking, from a global perspective, accrual accounting is the way to go. But many organizations and countries still use cash accounting. Happy to have a chat about that later on. But for those organizations and those countries which have not yet adopted accrual accounting, asset managers are going to find it difficult to survive in that kind of environment and prosper in that kind of environment. So accrual accounting and all its implications, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes' time, very, very briefly, is one of the foundational elements of doing asset management really well, in my humble opinion. Equally, in the 1990s, to implement the accrual accounting, there's a number of international financial reporting standards and accounting standards that need to be applied, and these are made mandatory by the Australian Accounting Standards Board in around about those years. I've tried to find the exact years. I can't find it, but nevertheless, in terms of the story, 1980s, 1990s, accrual accounting became mandatory. To implement accrual accounting, excuse me, you need to apply the international financial reporting standards and apply particularly the accounting standards. We're going to talk in a few minutes briefly about some aspects of some of those because it's relevant to our discussions. You can't develop asset management plans, and you can't develop infrastructure plans if you actually don't think about combining technical and financial decision making. Yeah, and so this is the start of that journey. Yeah, this is the start of that journey. The activity timeline goes on. I've mentioned already that the Asset Management Council was established in 2004. One of the really important aspects of its development was what appears on the screen now. The very first thing we did, and this was not my idea, it was John Hardwick's idea, and I actually happy to say publicly, this is one of the best things that ever happened to the Asset Management Council. Yeah, don't let John hear me say that. Don't tell John I said that publicly. But it is in hindsight one of the best things we did, and we spent a number of years developing the culture, and the culture of the Asset Management Council you can see on the screen here. And I'm going to talk about this for a second. This is quite important, and I think the Asset Leadership Network will probably have the same realization if they haven't already. We needed to develop a culture. Every member of the Asset Management Council needed to be open and inclusive. If you're going to have an infrastructure plan that covers all of Australia, you're going to have to talk to everyone, and you're going to have a culture that's open and inclusive. And for many people, this issue was quite a challenge. Still, some people within the Asset Management Council are challenged by that. It seems kind of obvious that you need to. And you need to, certainly for many people like myself, need to keep continually focusing on and thinking about your own behaviors in terms of, am I being open? Am I being inclusive? You don't always act perhaps as you should, but nevertheless, everyone needs to be reflective of their own behaviors and ensure that next time we do it better. So being open and inclusive, a very important part of the Asset Management Council and a very important part of the achievement of those infrastructure plans. Thought leadership goes hand in hand with that. Thought leadership means you're seen as, and you actually are, a body that knows what they're talking about. Yeah, thought leadership. I'm going to talk a bit about that a bit more about that shortly. What does that mean? We made that a goal for ourselves to demonstrate thought leadership. So we were always going to be pursuing and learning. We're never going to rest on our laurels. There's always things to learn, and we're going to share that. Right. So if we're developing this an approach to thought leadership, we're going to share that because we're open and inclusive, and that leads to the next part of that. Excuse me, that line where we share intellectual property that's freely available to all. There's really no point in being open and inclusive and thought leadership if you don't share your information. It's not about buying information. We're not in that game. We're in the business of saying you can use whatever we put together. We're actually putting it together to help everyone. Okay, to help everyone. All we ask is that you acknowledge where you got the information from. So intellectual property is freely shared, as a lot of you probably may be already aware. We act independently from the Institution of Engineers, and from a number of perspectives, strategically, we have a voice as well, which I'm going to talk about shortly. I don't really want to go into too much all the details, clearly, but there's some things that I think are really important to talk about. The roles of the Asset Management Council: promote awareness of the benefits, absolutely. Thought leadership, I've mentioned that already, but in detail, what that means for the Asset Management Council: we develop training and education courses on the why, what, and how of doing asset management. Those courses are very popular, still are. We developed the first courses in 2005, 2006. All of them were developed in-house by the teams, and that's a fantastic thing to do. We made a point of using our own expertise to put those things together, building up the involvement of the membership, building up the knowledge of the membership as well. And those courses, as I said to you, are still extremely popular. I deliver them. A number of others do as well, and I enjoy delivering those courses very much. And they're very much there are a number of courses, but essentially they're all about the why, what, and how. Why do you do asset management? What do you have to do to it? And then how do you do all this stuff? So they're, as I said to you, very popular courses. We develop chapters around Australia to enable member involvement. It's not about numbers, it's about getting people engaged, as I said to you before. Open, inclusive thought leadership means you're continually trying to get your people engaged, continually trying to get them to think and improve the way they think about and apply this discipline of asset management. We encourage our membership to be on the front foot, which is a cricketing term. I know the Americans baseball is the game. Well, in Australia, it's cricket. And there's a cricketing term that's says being on the front foot. That means being aggressive in the sense of assertive rather than aggressive. Being on the front foot means taking the challenge up. And don't be a victim again. It's a phrase we use often. And what we mean here is if you're a maintenance person or asset management person, as an example, if someone, the chief financial officer comes and changes your budget, how should you react to that? How can you develop plans that enable you to deal with those sort of situations? And so to be able to respond by saying, well, if you can't change the budget, this is the impact. And so we teach people the tools and techniques of how not to be a victim again. And that goes hand in hand with the why, what, and how courses. And that's we don't use that language all the time. Don't be a victim again, but it's a phrase we use, often used internally, to describe the environment that we're trying to solve, the challenge we give ourselves. And when we talk to our membership, don't become a victim again, or don't become a victim. This is how you should deal with those situations. In order to do that, of course, you need to develop the why, what, and how. And of course, I mentioned the body of knowledge, which is a whole bunch of documents and not spreadsheets, documents and online stuff, the online information, and associated with that asset management competency scheme that's been out around about 12 years now. And a number of agencies around the world have adopted that. Associated with the competency scheme are all the competencies associated with this discipline of asset management, and we've identified, around about 720 individual competencies relevant to the discipline of asset management. So all that's part of the competency scheme that was done some years ago. We make strategic commentary on things. There have been a number of legal cases associated with the discipline of asset management over the years, particularly 2014, 15, 16. The AIM Council issued a number of press releases in relation to those. They're not used often, but we do make commentary from time to time. We certainly get involved in standards, development of standards. I already mentioned that. ASNZS, Australia and New Zealand, we tend to be a bit of a team these days, Australia and New Zealand, have been for a number of years. Even though there's some bit of rivalry between the two countries, globally we kind of act as one. So Australia and New Zealand standards, we get involved in those. As I haven't mentioned Australian and New Zealand standards before. I've mentioned ISO and I've mentioned the IEC, International Electrotechnical Commission, the AIM Council involvement. So those are the sorts of the roles the AIM Council sees for itself in order to deliver on our mission, our vision and mission. And all that was created in 2004. We also developed in 2004 a relationship with the IEM in the UK and Abraman in Brazil, and that seems on the face of it quite interesting. Brazil, I ended up a number of us in the Asset Management Council took 6-month courses in speaking Portuguese. I did one of those. Don't ask me to speak Portuguese now, but in order to break down the language barrier, we had to walk towards the people you want to talk to. And so we actually did, a number of us did, do courses at night in Portuguese, so to try and communicate better with our friends in Brazil, and that relationship still continues. Interestingly, again, we can have an interesting conversation about that possibly later on. SAP and IFM got involved with the AIM Council. I'm noticing the time, and that was they sought us out. SAP, IFM, 40% of Australia's superannuation are involved. 40% of Australia's superannuation is spent by IFM, and they're certainly involved with the Asset Management Council. Key members of the AIM Council are involved with Treasury, New South Wales and Victorian Treasuries. I was involved in that as well. Again, the involvement is not paid. It's actually pro bono, so helping Treasury and understand and deal with issues. That was quite a bit of work. The Fiscal Responsibility Act was produced in New South Wales, which is an interesting act. It makes the asset management a government discipline. Treasury is the policeman of that in terms of financials. Essentially, it says that as a government, we're going to do things, we're going to build new things, but if we build new things, we're going to be aware of how much they're going to cost over the next 20 to 30 years, and we have to make sure in the Treasury's eyes that we know where the money is going to come from for the whole of life, not just the acquisition, and so on. And in 2016, the infrastructure strategies and plans were created. So that's a bit of a background to the timeline. Some very quickly, because I notice I'm running out of time. The body of knowledge itself has a number of core themes. The only one I'm going to point out in terms of what comes up on the slide is to support the achievement of business needs. Asset management must integrate technical financial decision making. Going to make a bit more play about that in a few minutes, and very much that's when we created all the courses and all the documents and all the information about the why, what, and how of asset management. We made sure, as much as we could, that we demonstrated we could do that, integrate technical financial decision making. So those are some of the core themes of the body of knowledge. That you'll find information classified this way on our websites and other places, and all our documentation, a fair amount of documentation. I'm certainly not going to talk to the detail of all of these, but there's a whole bunch of technical references in the body of knowledge, and there's about, from memory, there's about 700 standards, technical references that we use to support the body of knowledge. Here is just some of them. Clearly, we're not going to show you all of them. I'm not going to talk to you about any of these things, but other than to point out that behind the body of knowledge is this kind of detail. Yeah. There are also, I mentioned, competencies. There's about 1,200 competencies associated with the process of asset management, and we do have documentation and information about the processes of asset management. We integrate that with all the international financial reporting standard requirements and the accounting standard requirements. As we say to all the people on the courses, you don't have to agree with the way the accountants think about life, but you do have to understand it. You do have to understand it. And so, naturally enough, the content of these accounting standards and financial reporting standards is part of our courses, and we encourage all our people to understand the content of these things and apply them in their business. If you're going to talk to a chief financial officer, you need to know the way they think. and this represents the way they think. Very important, very important. In terms of leadership and culture references, here are 4 or 5. There's a couple here that I've been involved in, particularly the first and the second, but I'd like to point out the Adaptive Enterprise document. That is a fantastic book to read. That's all about how do you create organizations that are adaptive? How can they change quickly? What kind of leadership style and culture is needed to support that? So there's lots of good references around these days in relation to leadership and culture. And very much, if you need to get people, what I call the space between the ears, you need to get the space between the ears aligned from everyone. So that relates to culture. How do people think? In conclusion then, that's a lot of interesting information. The journey itself started with, and I emphasize this yet again, that the journey of developing infrastructure plans, developing any asset management plans within a company, that's no different to this journey as well, to be honest. The first thing is about developing a collaborative, inclusive culture. Yeah, everyone's got to believe in that. It only takes 1 or 2 people who don't believe in it to challenge that very much. So it's very important that you keep a very close eye on the culture that you develop and maintain that, I guess, a bit of a discipline about assuring yourself that the culture is continuing to be collaborative, inclusive. And inclusive means you walk towards people, not away. You walk towards people, you engage with people. And to support the achievement of business and national needs, asset management must integrate technical and financial decision making. I've mentioned that already, and part of that is how to do that. Not only do we need to do that, but we need to demonstrate to people how that's done. And the body of knowledge does that. Not just our body of knowledge, but also the other organizations that I've alluded to in Australia with an asset management focus. They similarly have very, very similar approaches documented for their particular industries as well. We need to, step 3, we need to motivate people, motivate and educate. Why do we need AEM? What do we need to do that, and how do we do it? And I notice the ALN does a lot of this as well. So there's not a dissimilar path here. Why are we going to do all this? Well, I need to improve myself, I need to improve my family, and I need to improve Australia. So why are we motivating and educating to do all those things? And governments, and when you talk to federal governments and state governments, one of the reasons asset management has some resonance with those, it's about developing these things called competitive advantage. So improving Australia, you need to deal directly with the issue of competitive advantage. Step 4, use conversations and conferences to motivate people and challenge. Challenge is an important aspect of motivation, not in a negative way, in a positive way. Challenge people. Work with government agencies. You can see PM&C there is Prime Minister and Cabinet. That's at a federal level. At a state level, it's Premier and Cabinet. And certainly one of we have people working and have over the years with people working in government, and it's really important to get to the senior leadership, particularly of the public service. That's where a lot of the sponsorship for these activities arises now through that senior management, particularly at that Prime Minister and Cabinet and Premier and Cabinet level. Very important to have that influence at that level. And then we use the body of knowledge and the maturity assessments associated with that to highlight needed improvement and benefits that should accrue. And that's very much the focus of many government organisations around Australia now, is to do with the last bit I'm talking about. They might not always use the AIM Council body of knowledge, but they might use their own industry's body of knowledge or their own industry's maturity assessments. But there's certainly a desire around Australia now for people to get involved and measure and improve. That's a whole lot of information there, Jack. I'm sure there's lots of questions and comments. I do apologise for going over time for a few minutes, but I do get excited about these things occasionally. And I found it very difficult, honestly, to put this presentation together, because what do you talk about? There's so much you could talk about. I think I've hit the high points. I haven't hit the low points. Maybe we can talk about the low points later on. But hopefully that created some points to talk about. Jack, over to you.
Peter, this is fantastic. So thank you so much. And this is a perfect segue into the panel that Michael Hardy is going to be moderating, which you're on and Boudewijn's on. And I think I might hang around to be part of it too. So Michael, take it away, please.
Thanks, Jack. So we're going to talk for a few minutes with some folks that I will allow to introduce themselves, those that haven't already, I should say. and maybe with a few opening remarks, we're going to talk about this path forward and really stress on the asset leadership part. So we often in this group, you've heard people make the distinction between sort of asset management and asset leadership. And so we're going to explore a couple of topics in that realm where we have time today. So first, person on our panel is Peter, who you've already met, so I won't ask him to introduce himself again. And I'm going to throw it to you, Boudewijn, and let you introduce yourself and have your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mike. So yes, my name is Boudewijn. With a name like that, as you can see, I'm Dutch, but I actually live in Canada. I'm actually Peter's evil twin in Canada. We were comparing notes earlier today, and essentially what he does in Australia, I do in Canada, very simply speaking. So that will suffice as introduction. My task now is in 5 minutes to cover the whole rest of the world. Peter talked about Australia for 35 minutes, and I need to cover the whole rest of the world in 5 minutes. So that'll be interesting. I think, Jack, you mentioned that there's 4 countries that stand out when it comes to certification, at least. And therefore, let's start with those. So I think Australia is covered. That leaves us the 3 other ones. And you can ask very quickly, like, why are the 3 other ones so hot? And generally speaking, it boils down to, the usual thing, that is, there is a burning platform somewhere. And in the case of Holland or the Netherlands, my home country, it's very simple. We're natural asset managers for the good reason that most of the country is under sea level. And therefore, if you don't look after your assets, the country will be gone because we're literally pumping out water every day. So, that creates this culture, which Peter was mentioning, and also creates a national consensus on the fact that you have to look after the infrastructure because it is vital. It literally is vital for the country. Otherwise, we have no country. So that makes it very simple. With that, what you find indeed in the Netherlands is there's national consensus. They're good at asset management. They've been looking very carefully at it for a long time. They've been copying the Brits, actually, to a large extent, as far as the taking the lead in best practices, etc. Provincial governments, generally speaking, are starting to kind of adopt their own strategies and actually getting certified in many agencies. Utilities are forced to be certified, or pretty much, if they want to continue operating. The national government is not as visible. So at the national level, yes, there is a national consensus, but there is not really a very strong national infrastructure plan. Like, for instance, like Peter was mentioning, there's a broad consensus, but it hasn't been written out as such, if you wish. So that's the Netherlands, very quickly. The Brits, of course, well, between, Peter mentioned the fight between Australia and New Zealand. I'll tell you, the bigger fight is between the UK and Australia as to who invented asset management. So clearly the IEM is the AMC's evil twin. Both of them have very, very similar paths, in kind of influencing their national thinking around asset management and building this body of knowledge. I would argue that in the UK, the whole game was largely regulator driven, in the sense that they actually screwed up royally. The UK screwed up royally in the 70s. They had a few very big industrial and infrastructure accidents, which really kind of woke up the regulators and governments the fact that assets were not being managed. So from that came a very technocratic approach to the fact that there must be a better way. And the IEM came out of that, of course, as an association, but also very strong regulators. You think of Ofwat, Ofgem. These are presumably the leading regulators when it comes to really pushing the envelope as to what you should be doing with asset management and how to think about the societal benefits of asset management, etc. So a lot of good work going on there. The other country that was mentioned was Japan. Now, Japan is very different. Japan was a latecomer to this game. You could argue that they've historically always been very good at asset management in the sense that they gold plate everything because they're perfectionists, but they can't afford that anymore because they actually have a shrinking population much faster than in most other countries. Then they had a few problems like Fukushima, and if you put that together, you actually get a perfect storm, which actually forced government to really think about, okay, we need to do things differently. We do things smarter and maybe a bit less prescriptive, because historically it had been very prescriptive. So currently there's a big thinking tank going on, like a bit of thinking effort going on in Japan around how to do things differently. That is true in the water sector, it's true in the electrical sector, which on top of it is being dismantled. It used to be monopolies, and they're now going to be put in competition, so they have to just become a bit more effective altogether in the way they run their show. So there's a huge pressure from above in Japan, from government down, to really rethink complete sectors, and with that, a lot of interest in asset management. So those are the three low-hanging fruit. Two other ones of note. First of all, Colombia. Why Colombia? Well, because it's one of the very few countries in the world that actually took the bull by the horns and told every utility that they had to be certified to ISO 55000 within 3 years by law. So all of a sudden, that of course creates a dynamic in the country which forces literally every utility, and by extension, some government agencies, to start looking into this in earnest and to really adopt asset management very quickly. So that's an interesting little example. And actually, there's a few other countries in South America which are looking very carefully at the Colombian example. Peru comes to mind, Ecuador, who might well come up with similar legislation. So that'll essentially kind of force the whole game top down from the government down. And the other country, of course, I'm going to finish with the other country, that's Canada, because the question was indeed what's going on in Canada. So Canada, to me, is a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, they look a lot at the UK, of course, no surprise, where the Queen is still the Queen here. So basically, we look at the UK for by way of example of what's going on there, best practices, etc. But we are a federal country, very much like the US. So we're kind of sitting in between. And with that, what you'll find in Canada is actually that our forte has become municipal asset management. And this came from the realization that at the end of the day, as Peter mentioned, we're all in this together, as individuals and as communities. And the community, of course, the first community that you think of is your municipal community. That's where you live. That's what you see every day. And frankly, in Canada, we came to the conclusion that municipal asset management was horrible. Most municipalities are small. They have small staff, low level of competence, a very diverse set of assets, which is therefore hard to manage. You have to be a master of many trades. So municipal asset management was horrible. And the federal government therefore decided that rather than start at the top with their own agencies, they would actually push the money down to the municipalities. And that's been going on for 10 years now, and quite successfully. Through different vehicles, they've essentially been financing the development of competence and capabilities at the municipal level. And the string, of course, is if you don't do that, if you don't become better, you will get no subsidies to do bigger infrastructure projects, which you might be dreaming of, that new wastewater plant or that new bridge. It's not going to come if you cannot show me that you're actually good at managing your assets. So that's the carrot. Through that, we've developed a lot of a specific body of knowledge, basically, for municipal asset management. This has been a cooperative effort between the Canadian Network of Asset Managers, the IAM, and actually the Government Financial Officials Association, GFOA, I'll say it, which is actually both Canadian and US based. So GFOA has actually been a major player in this particular exercise because they clearly see that there is a potential to export the knowledge that has been developed in Canada into the US, because I think the problem is very, very similar in the US indeed. So that's one thing in Canada. Some provinces have been quite aggressive in pushing their own policies and their own frameworks. Ontario in particular has been kind of adding a layer on top of what the feds were asking from municipalities to really kind of build asset plans, show asset plans. They've also, at the same time, kind of forced through their regulator utilities to become much better at asset management. So in Ontario, you'll find significant level of competence in asset management in utilities, power utilities, water utilities. The feds are also slowly starting to look at their own problems, as in federal agencies. There is an institute called the Real Property Institute of Canada, which is essentially kind of semi-financed by the federal government and is mostly federal employees that are members of that association. They're really trying to build up their own competence level and to kind of grow the agenda of asset management within the federal government. And then finally, utilities. I mentioned utilities in Ontario. I would say that in general, utilities in Canada have been following their UK peers quite closely. And with that, by now, I would say that most of the large utilities, certainly in the electrical sector and the gas sector, are, I'd say, ISO compliant. Very few of them are certified, but they're pretty much everyone is compliant. Bear in mind that in Canada, most utilities are, or a lot of utilities are still crown corporations. So basically they're owned by the province. So again, the pressure is there. But even the privately owned or investor-owned utilities are following suit, because now it's become a bit of a dynamic that everybody has to follow. And then last quick comment, ISO itself. One big shift that we've seen, and I think it ties in again with some of what Peter was saying, is the push for sustainability. And I talk about sustainability here in the context of, the environmental sustainability, not sustaining your assets. What we're starting to see in the last year is very different angles within the ISO community, not ourselves, not 55,000, but certainly in the finance community, growth and interest in the fact that, finance should be sustainable finance. And that, of course, opens for them the question mark is, okay, well, every time, therefore, we make a decision, it's not only about the money, it's also about the environment. To which our answer has been, as clever asset managers, we've been thinking about this for years. And actually, it's not about the environment, nor about the finance, it's about everything, right? Like, we look at it through the 6 capitals model or through the triple bottom line. We look at the SDGs from the United Nations. We've been thinking about this for years. So all of a sudden, the asset management community within ISO is in a kind of leadership position all of a sudden, because we've been working on these multi-criteria decision analysis problems. We've talked about value, we've talked about decision-making, trying to please all the stakeholders basically within our community for a long, long time, for reasons that Peter mentioned. So all of a sudden, our importance within the ISO community and influencing others to think about this in a much broader sense has grown significantly the last year, which is extremely encouraging. And with that, I will shut up.
That's really great. In fact, your last point is kind of a perfect segue into the first topic I wanted to throw out to our panel. But before I do that, I realized that I forgot to introduce myself. So you're wondering maybe who I am. As you can see from my slide, I work for a company called Bureau Veritas. We're a global company, almost 200 years old. That's one of the really global leaders in testing, inspection, certification, and operate in 140 or so countries. In North America, we have that same sort of range of services from sort of, every industry, oil and gas and municipal government, doing all that sort of stuff. And asset management is a big growth area, a great big focus area for our company. And ISO 55000 plays into that naturally in our certification group, but also in our asset management group. Also a senior fellow here at ALN, been involved here for maybe 5 or 6 years, it feels like. And one of the experiences I have is that every session, the webinar, anything that we ever do, I always feel like I learn something, because I'm always connecting with people who are expressing this asset leadership or asset management in some different context or different industry. But I will say that last week, on Tuesday afternoon, the session that we had there with Cecilia Moet and Mark Morial, Eric Brown from DHS, Hugh Sinclair from WSSC, these folks took on an aspect of asset management that really had not occurred to me in a big way, and that is, it's sort of I'll say the social justice side of things. So Mark Morial is president of National Urban League, really introduced this idea, and I'm paraphrasing, of looking at all of the decisions that have been made, and essentially getting back to that asset leadership. These decisions to either make it difficult for sort of racial equity to prosper in the country, have all really been asset management decisions. And so disenfranchisement, home ownership, I mean, the list could go on, and I encourage everybody listening right now to go and listen to those recordings on the website, because it was eye-opening for me. So to our panel, especially with this international view, where are you seeing, and I'm going to start with you, Boudewijn, because you've looked at, your task today was to sort of look at across the whole world. Sustainability, absolutely. But to what degree is social justice, being understood in the asset management community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think it is extremely variable, and stereotypes come to mind. Like when you think of it, of course, like presumably at one end of the scale you have Japan, where that is something which is not understood at all. I think there is still a lot of work to do there. And at the other end, you have countries which are much more inclined to think that way. And actually Canada, frankly, in that regard is doing pretty well. If I look at the way that we see our customers, I work for a company that develops decision-making software for asset managers. And if I look at a lot of our clients, it's very high on their agenda. And it's something that they are trying to really build into their decision-making frameworks in the context of making asset management decisions. So every country is different, but I would think that my general observation, and this is just me, no data here, just looking at what I see around the world, is there is a lot to do. There's a lot to do. It might not be as visible as it is right now in North America, but there is a lot to do for sure.
Wow, thank you. Peter, what are you seeing on that front, sort of from Australia point of view?
Yeah, would you like to be a bit more specific there, Michael? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So to what degree do you see the social justice angle playing into the decisions about how we think about asset management? And certainly learned a lot about sort of the financial management, other things from your presentation, but.
A huge part of these infrastructure plans is the social aspects to this. Huge part of it. Environmental aspects, social aspects. It's a huge part of it, and that's why the plans have to be consensus. They have to represent a consensus of the community's expectations. There's not always absolute agreement. Can never be in a consensus environment, but there has to be a middle ground where everyone meets. But bluntly, yes, absolutely. The environmental, societal issues have to be dealt with to the extent to which, in this case, infrastructure can deal with it. Yep. But it's about creating. We have lots of experiences. All of us have lots of experiences where things were built in the 50s and 60s. When you look at that now, you think, why did they do that? And now a lot more thinking's going into, well, should we have community housing in 30-story blocks? Why would we want to create those sorts of environments? So it's the social aspects are very much. In fact, you find in Sydney now that doesn't happen anymore. I'm not claiming Sydney's any better than worse than anyone else, by the way, but we still have the remnants of the 60s environments and 50s environments. But then now it's about integrating people of all different socioeconomic types throughout the community, not just in one particular region. So there's a lot more emphasis now on spreading these things out, and in that sense, and also about creating small little communities. So the notion of a community is very strong now too. Not always successful, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Australia's paved with gold here by any means, but a lot of emphasis on those things.
That's really good, thank you. I think we'll certainly have some time for some questions if we move along here, and I suspect there'll be a few on this topic as well. Revisit that. I would like to introduce Alex. I don't think we have Alex on camera yet, but there he is. And so Alex, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and appreciate you for being a good sport today too, because I know you were substituting, doing a little pinch hitting here with the last minute. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you and your company is relating to asset management. Can't hear you.
Alex, you're muted.
Or unplugged.
Yeah, one or the other.
Still unplugged.
So Matt, well,
Alex, we're still not hearing you. Sorry about that. Yeah, we're not hearing you.
Great. Jack, why don't you chime in on our how you're seeing what you've heard so far today?
We can hear you now.
Oh, there's Alex. We got Alex.
I guess the headset didn't work.
All right.
Third time is a charm, I hope. Hi, I'm Alex Barenblit. I'm with LMI. LMI is a consultant to U.S. government agencies. That's pretty much what we do for a living. And we do all kinds of consulting. I'm with the logistics organization, and as that implies, we provide consulting support to agencies across all asset types. My area of subject matter expertise is personal property. I became aware of ISO 55,000 through principally Jim Dieter. And when I learned about it, it really opened my eyes. What some people call silo thinking, I tend to call cylinders of excellence. We had experts in real property, experts in infrastructure, and my area of expertise again is personal property. And we learned a lot from talking to each other. Since March of this year, LMI has allowed us to take the training that was mentioned earlier in this presentation, this session. Since March, LMI has now 46 ISO 55,000 certified consultants across all types of properties. So that's been very helpful. The sessions that I've listened to last 2 weeks, that last week and this week, as you might expect, since my focus is federal, the session on federal facility asset management, as well as the one on federal law enforcement, were of most interest to me. But one of the things that I'd like to point out is the thinking across all asset forms that ISO 55,000 takes into account has enabled me to learn from my real estate partners and my real estate partners to learn from me. And as we all understand what we're focused with around the world with COVID-19, we're now better enabled to help our clients, and you are too, everybody on this call is better enabled to think through what does the new normal look like across all asset classes. It may mean a reduction in real property footprint. It may mean different classes of personal property. And that's the power that ISO 55,000 thinking brings, I think, to enable us and everybody on this session to think those things through.
Really well said.
Michael, can I jump in for a sec?
Please, absolutely, Jack.
So one of the things that, as Boudewijn was talking about the Canadian situation, I remembered that the reason that those 4 countries popped up in our study was because, I think it was pointed out, they all had a lot of certified organizations. And so for the reason Boudewijn mentioned, Canada didn't pop up on that screen because very few of the Canadian organizations had been certified. In fact, I think maybe only about 2. And none of the municipalities. But when our General Accountability Office a couple of years ago did a review of the federal asset management program, they took a trip to Canada and actually devoted an appendix in their final report to what they learned. And it was just really illuminating to learn from them how much Canada had actually embraced asset management, and particularly, as Boudewijn points out, at the municipal level. That was a real eye-opener certainly for me, and I think a lot of the other folks in this country. I'd like to get Peter to elaborate on a point that he made, and then invite Boudewijn to chime in. He talked about early on that it was the accrual accounting that really provided the foundation or the impetus to implement asset management. And when I first heard that, I had no idea what that meant. I mean, I understand what accrual accounting is, but the point that stood out to me, and I'd like Peter to either correct me or elaborate on this, was it was on the balance sheet where the real difference was made. It's because, and this was discussed yesterday on the call about the water industry. You know, we show asset value on our balance sheets according to the U.S. accounting standards as a depreciated value. So that's kind of worthless actually. It might be helpful for tax purposes, but it's worthless for asset management. Australia, and I'm not sure which other countries, but Australia uses the international standard, which is to value assets at what they call fair value, which, if I understand it correctly, is the best estimate that you have of what you could sell it for. And that's important because in Australia, their municipalities actually can sell off assets if they want to. And so, the link is that by making smart investments in your assets, you either maintain or you can even improve the fair value of those assets. And so you're essentially, your financial statements are a scorecard that's real. I mean, these are numbers that are audited. These are numbers that tell a story that help incentivize you to make smarter decisions. Is that a fair way to describe it, Peter? When you turn your unmute yourself.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. The whole point of financial statements is to be accurate, right? When you read financial statements, it's you have to always read the notes, right? Because the notes explain how the numbers arrived at. But in general, though, the whole point of having financial statements, they're meant to represent what is actually going on, as distinct from someone's view on that. And so the whole reason for the IFRS is to actually implement that general requirement that the financial statements represent reality as distinct from some other universe. Yeah, there's no point having another universe, creative accounting is a term that's often used. It's often used negatively as well, and we don't want people being creative in a negative sense. In other words, not telling people what's really going on. From a fair value perspective, there's a number of ways you determine fair value, and that's got to be, the Australian Accounting Standards Board talks about that. But and that's okay too. There's a couple of ways you can do it, but at least then you're being open and honest about how the value is derived. So you can actually talk about, because on the balance sheet it represents the investment of shareholders and stakeholders and all that sort of stuff. So you have to reflect that accurately and fairly, yeah, in a reasonable way. The other thing I'd say about accrual accounting, and why I mentioned accrual accounting and asset management soul twins. We're all about understanding if I invest in this asset now, something's going to accrue from that, right? Something will happen that I think is going to be good is going to happen, hopefully. Something's going to accrue from that. It's the whole notion of accrual accounting and asset management. They're intellectually twinned. Yeah, they're intellectually twinned. They have the same sort of purpose. And the other thing, in relation to those people who look at ISO 55000 and particularly 55001, and the term asset management objectives is used, let me tell you now that asset management will not work in any company if those asset management objectives aren't almost the same as the chart of accounts used by financial people. Asset management objectives and chart of accounts have got to be twinned for asset management to work. So there's every good reason why chief financial officers and financial people, and if I can use the phrase technical asset management people, need to realize that and work together. Yeah, because as I said to you, if the asset management objectives are not aligned with the chart of accounts and the chart of accounts are not aligned with the asset management objectives, then you can forget about asset management working in the business at all.
True.
So there's another perspective on this whole thing. Yeah.
So
I can see Boudewijn agreeing with me unusually. What's going on, Boudewijn? Yeah.
No, I was just going to build on top of it. I actually,
go
it actually does point to one of the other areas in which ISO is working very hard right now, and it is that alignment actually between asset management and finance. And there is technical aspects to it, like for instance, how do you align the registers? Like, because a finance individual might be looking at an asset very differently from an asset manager. So how do we align those views, and how do we make sure that, as Peter says, like they're in sync, if you wish. So that's an area where there's still a lot to do. But then there's also the selling aspect of it. And forget corporations for a second. I'm back in my municipalities, where accounting is fuzzy at best, because you're not there to make a profit or anything like that. One of the best moments in my life was when 2 years ago, I get my little leaflet from a municipality, like just newsletter from the council basically, and all of a sudden they're starting to explain to me that they're going to start putting money aside to actually build a bit of a reserve, because they can see big projects coming in the assets management space. So they're now starting to sell to the taxpayer the fact that the future is not all that rosy, because we've been neglecting stuff for the last 50 years and we're going to have to catch up. And here's the way we're going to do it. And they had this whole asset management plan basically that they were now selling to every one of us in the municipality, and they did it very well. They did it in a very educational way. So yes, there is a financial or the accounting aspect of it, but there is also how do you sell it, of course, to the people that actually are going to finance all this. In this case, the taxpayer, which I thought was very interesting, and they've been consistent at it. It really has become a priority for them. It's like, this is the way we're going to do it. This is the way we're going to catch up, and you're going to cough up. So
Boudewijn,
if I may offer a comment. The alignment of finance and the alignment of asset management is critical and very important. At the same time, asset management is not merely an accounting or finance exercise, and a lot of people view it that way. Getting real value and maximizing that value out of the assets is critical, and not everybody looks at asset management as more than just a bookkeeping paperwork exercise.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add to that is there's a lot of work in Australia, particularly from academic institutions, universities, and things, to change the content of the IAS's accounting standards, and that's largely because philosophically the accounting standards are not philosophically aligned with the notion of risk. Yeah, and I still find it amazing in this world that we live in that a budget can be put down to the nearest cent, yet from an engineering point of view, things are talked about in terms of probabilities. And so there's still misalignment there. But having said that, many accountants and the people that involved in Australian accounting standards would recognise this issue and are working to try and create an accounting environment and an engineering environment that has the same view on risk and the same way of dealing with it.
That's really great. So I've got at least 5 more questions, and there's several that have come in, and we have absolutely no time left to do any of that, unfortunately. So we are going to move to our wrap up. And Jack, I can't recall who all is staying on with you for that, but we've got obviously a couple of huge weeks here to put a wrap up on, and we better leave time for that. Thanks very much, Peter and Boudewijn and Alex, for joining us today on this. It's been really, really great to see this sort of international view.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much for the panel. And by the way, what we have been doing on these daily sessions is, although we have sort of a soft stop at 2:30, in the sense that, Nick will come on and he'll show our sponsors and so forth. But then people who want to stay on the call, we'll stay on and chat with people for, another half hour or so, or whatever seems to work best for folks. So Peter probably has to go to sleep.
No, I have an hour to go to breakfast, so fill it up. Fill it up, you know.
Okay. Well, I'd like to invite Jim Dieter and Jenny Zach and Cecilia Mowat to join for a wrap-up panel. And the rest of y'all can hang in there too if you'd like. So let me just start off. First of all, welcome, and thank you all for being part of this. One of the things that, as we set out to plan this event, and the way we started was Jim kicked it off with kind of giving us some new ideas about asset leadership and how asset leadership should drive good asset management. And then we talked about our national asset leadership strategy, which we had basically determined to be a sector-based approach to implementing better asset management across this country. And if you go back over our the sessions that we scheduled, a number of those sessions were devoted to the different sectors. And so I know for myself, I learned a lot about characteristics of these sectors that will be helpful to us as we start thinking about what we do next. But Jim, what was your take?
Yeah, well, first, another amazing, awesome session here. The good news is that we didn't get done. There's much more to do and many more conversations we had. So I think maybe that's my my statement for today and for all of these sessions. I was sitting here thinking, I just need to go back through and listen to all these sessions again and take better notes than I did the first time. But let me say, from an ALN perspective, there's obviously so much, and now this groundswell that we've been predicting, we see that's happened other places, but I think is further happening there and is starting to happen in the States. That what our unique opportunity in the ALN is to be able to see those intersections. I don't like to use the word silos anymore. I'm going to quit using silos as intersections with these sectors in different approaches and connecting people, and how much, as Alex and others have said, how much we can learn when we hear what's going on in other sectors. The water sector discussion yesterday was just a real eye-opener. Michael pointed out the amazing session on equity. So we have a lot of topics to delve into, and I'm somewhat known as a recruiter. And the recruiter in me says, what we need to advance these topics is more people getting more involved and taking leadership roles in these kind of discussions. So your email may be dinging in the future.
Thanks, Jim. Jenny, how about you?
So I feel like my head's going to explode with all the knowledge that has been shared over the last 3 weeks. And I'd had the privilege as a representative of the board kind of welcoming everybody with some opening comments almost 3 weeks ago, and promising that it was going to be a full 3 weeks of lots and lots of knowledge. And we more than surpassed that. I think the way I can sum it up is I have found a renewed personal motivation for involvement. It's one thing to be professionally engaged as a company with the Asset Leadership Network. But sometimes I felt a little bit like an outsider myself. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an accountant or a finance person. I'm a communicator. And what I heard coming through so strongly from what Peter said and his 6 steps leading towards a national consensus and cooperation and movement, at the core of it was about communication. And breaking down silos is about communication. It's about trying to understand how somebody else understands. What's the language they're using? When you talk about the importance of being able to understand what your CFO values and how he thinks, and being able to speak his language. I felt really encouraged that as a communicator, not an engineer, not an accountant, not an asset owner, but as a communicator, I've got a role to play. And I think the Asset Leadership Network has an incredible role for furthering and supporting that kind of communication among different sectors, stakeholders, participants. I'll avoid the word silo too, Jim. But there are so many pockets of expertise. When we come together and start communicating, there's a lot that can be accomplished. So that's been a really exciting thing to see.
Cecilia, you've been a new addition to our community and made some wonderful contributions this week. What was your take?
Well, for me, it was very exciting because what I do is holistic, inclusive economic development. And I come from a background that is, well, actually legal in the first place, but business oriented and corporate. And it was an interesting thing for me to sit in on many of these sessions and to see the intersectionality that Jim is talking about. And the places where we could make the puzzle have a better picture. When we talk about the silo thinking, it's not silo thinking. I really liked Alex's way of putting it, the cylinders of excellence. People are so concerned with what is their role in any company, organization, government, municipality, it doesn't matter. They're laser focused on getting what is their job done. And asset management is a coordinated activity, coordinated and inclusive activity. And that's one of the things that the best cases that were shared really showed. When you think about the Brazos regional river, the BRA, I kept saying BRA, BRA, and also the hospital network story that talked about how they internalized the ISO 55000 series and understanding of the importance of asset management. That was just wonderful, a wonderful explanation of implementing ISO 55000 that was given in those two instances in particular. But for me, I love what Peter said today, that his job is to get people talking. And for me, I like to say, Peter, that I'm a diva, a dialogue, innovation, vision activator. So with that, when you start looking at what are the assets, it really is finding ISO 55000 as a system that allows people to have a common taxonomy of language and a culture of valuation and being mindful and thoughtful about what the assets are that you have, who are they for, which Mark Morial said it was all about being for the people. It's always the end user that you're really supposed to be worrying about at the end of the day, who your customer is and the like. And so finding a way to take us out of our very focused vision, which is what everybody always does, and move us into a more strategic mindset is what I think ALN has the opportunity to do with ALN's leadership network concept versus the actual management of the assets and the implementation and the like. So I'm very excited for you guys because there's so much afoot that is happening. And as you start thinking about what are the aspects that haven't been included, that it's ripe for because it's written, ISO 55001 is written to be used broadly. How do we sell it so it starts becoming used broadly? And I think that was really one of the lessons that I had, but there's a lot more I could speak to on this and will after I let somebody else speak.
Peter, do you have any additional thoughts you'd like to share with us?
We have a little, only one, I say only one, but the one key one that pick up what Cecilia said. We have a little phrase in the Asset Management Council where we say, in order for me to be understood, first I must understand you. Yeah. And that is such a good little phrase to use to people all the time, all the time. Just needs to be continually reinforced, continually reinforced. That's all.
Yeah.
See, Mike has joined us. Mike, you got any thoughts you'd like to share?
Thanks, Jack. Mike Bordenaro, the communications director at Asset Leadership Network. And it's been my privilege to be part of the planning committee for this event, which brilliantly chose these people and this topic to end with. Well, there is the ALN Senior Fellow discussion at 4 o'clock Eastern today, but this has been spectacular. And what Peter and Boudewijn have outlined is a path forward for the United States. So we thank you for sharing your incredible insights. And we're on that path. Jim Dieter is the Peter Kohler and Boudewijn of the US. And he's got us being inclusive. He has always demanded that we be inclusive, and we continue to strive to do that. It was his idea to have the panel that Michael Hardy pointed out, the addressing inequality with asset leadership. And that was a standout presentation for me. I've always been an advocate for social justice, and I'm so happy to have a structured, systematic approach that we know can work to address this. That's like history of the world type wonderful. And we have been so busy being involved in this, but we are only going to be busier. We have so much good work that we can be doing. I'm just like excited to get at it. And I would also like to say that a new person to join us is Nick Kanoki. And Nick, I would like you to share some thoughts on what you've learned.
Oh man, Mike, you didn't tell me you were going to do that. I'm the director of technology with the Asset Leadership Network, and I've been working with Jim and Mike for years now. And it feels like only this year I'm finally coming out of the shadows and kind of introducing myself to more of the team, and my understanding of the team with this event has expanded tenfold or more. I'm just understanding more every day with these talks how this is all about unifying people and understanding. And I've really particularly loved today, Peter Kohler, kind of your ideas and thoughts and the methods that you shared with us of success. I know you mentioned you had some low points that you could talk about another time, and hopefully we'll have you back to do that. But so far it's been a really hopeful session. And I just echo everyone else's thoughts, and specifically, Peter, I love the idea that, I cannot be understood until I understand you, and, putting that in the context of you taking Portuguese at night to better understand people that you would like to work with, and then hopefully educate in this way that you think is helpful. I mean, just an amazing little anecdote that says volumes, and that I hope we can all get inspired by to do similar things in our own fields, industries, ways that we work. We all work differently, and that's what I love about this network. Just, I'm a tech guy, so like, how can I add to this body of knowledge and understanding? And Peter, you're a different, Cecilia, you bring a whole different flavor than any of us else so far that have spoken here, and it's wonderful. Even your colors that you're showing, pink, it's just new and exciting, and we need pink represented here equally. Like, it's great. So that's what I had to say. And I do notice that we're coming close to the hour. So maybe I'll just briefly take this opportunity to say thank you to our organizational members. As always, this would not be possible without the support they lend to the Asset Leadership Network. We're so grateful for that. They really make this possible. And we are so grateful to be here and to be able to do this. And now back to you guys for whoever that has to leave now, understandable, and everyone else that can continue for a little bit. Great.
Well, I hope that Peter and Boudewijn will not leave, because I wanted to also say that one of the things that was also very clear to me is that, first of all, ISO 55001, we don't reinvent the wheel. We have something that is systematic that we can use, but we also have examples, international examples, and the power of the presentations that you both did today, as well as some of the others. And, you know, Danielle Ortiz raised the UN Sustainable Development Goals as something that we need to marry. And today, when you raised again finance, Peter, that was so critical, because that was in the back of my mind throughout many of the discussions and meetings. My corporate hat came back on, and I'm thinking about my role as an asset manager in corporate America. And that balance sheet issue is a critical one, and leveraging, marrying the balance sheet with the operational people that have to maintain and the technical side and everything else is one that has to be done. But then the risk management piece of it, which folds into the strategy, is critical. And if you're not managing it, is it ISO 55000 4.1 that says you've got to align with the business objectives? I might get that section wrong. I'm always quoting something wrong, but mission is critical, and making sure that from the top to the bottom of the organization, everybody knows what the mission is, and then knows what are the critical assets of the organization and how their roles impact the mission and the value of those assets. That's something that I think is important, and you guys gave examples of how you've done that internationally, how it's been being done. And we in America don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to steal shamelessly, as one of my former CEOs at McDonald's used to say, steal shamelessly and learn from others. So for me, looking at what you've done, it's a very simple overlay to add on the social justice piece, Mike, the equality and eliminating inequality by thinking of the end user and thinking of the result of your role as either a municipality or a corporation, federal, whoever, on the life of the community. I wrote down what you had in yours, Peter. I really loved the definition of the Asset Management Council: to be open, inclusive, thought leadership, share intellectual property freely to all, and act independently. But then there was another one that you said in terms of to the benefit of all, enabling benefits for all from the use of the assets. So that's one focus I think we should try, or ALN should really try and raise up. What are the benefits? Always asking that question, what are the benefits to all in what we have with these assets? Making sure that we understand that we might be missing benefits. And that other piece of it, the relevant stakeholders. How are we defining relevant? If we always ask that question, who's at the table and then who's not at the table, I think we can make a difference in what we do for our organizations individually and what we do for the communities that we're in. So enough of my spieling. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like.
You can
I'd
tell
like-
I'm a little passionate about inclusion. I always talk about
Not at all.
don't go to the usual suspects for information.
I'll tell you.
And Alex made that comment about how he learned from the real estate people who must have learned from him as a logistics person. Everybody learns from each other if we use diverse perspectives.
One of the most interesting experiences I had from a learning point of view was a few years back. we were approached by the province of British Columbia, which is where I'm based. I'm based in Vancouver. And of course, as a province, as a provincial government, they have ministries of everything. You know, there's a Ministry of Education, there's a Ministry of Housing, there's a Ministry of, you know, police and prisons and whatever. I don't know what they're called, but anyhow, there's maybe 35 ministries, and every one of them, of course, has its own stakeholders and its own priorities. And the problem of the province as a whole, and this came through us through the technocrats, of course, in this case, the IT department, is the IT department came to us and said, look, about 35 ministries, they're all knocking on the door and they all want my attention because their project is the most important project. And I don't know how to compare building a prison with, you know, adding a classroom to, you know, whatever, cleaning more snow off the roads. But that's the problem, right? Like the problem is, where do I put the next priority? Or how do I rank all this stuff across all the services that a province is offering to the world, or to British Columbia in this particular case? And it was a fascinating exercise because we wound up with this hundreds of stakeholders, of course, literally groups, and literally therefore also hundreds of different criteria that all were part of the mix. Like, you know, reasonably everybody had a case. So coming up with a framework to allow that organization to basically weigh off, you know, the value of doing a particular project compared to something which was completely foreign, like completely orthogonal to the first project, was a fascinating exercise. And that's actually what more and more we're starting to see now. Asset management is facilitating and also encouraging in a way that is, you know, to build this framework, this decision-making framework, which allows you to kind of take this very broad view and include everybody in the decision-making process, at least from a valuation point of view, maybe not sitting around the table, but their values are being represented in the discussion. It was absolutely fascinating.
Well, that's interesting. Were you in on our session on Tuesday when Mark Morial talked about how he started his role as mayor of New Orleans? He's talked about the fact that bond projects had been done individually and compete in competition. And he said, Nayet no mas, we're going to bring it all together and we're going to have everybody get in the one canoe, and you need to tell me what you need and why you need it, and we're going to prioritize. So what he created was transparency of expectations. And so even though you have to leverage 100 different stakeholders, if everybody knows that they've been heard, and if you have a repository that says, here are all the things we have to do, then you have the ability to move and undulate with it and find a way to make things happen and prioritize, where this time you might not be the project that gets the go ahead right away, but you're in line. And in the interim, begin doing these steps so that you can be ready when we're ready. It's a different way.
And you understand why you're second in line, because
yes,
we all agree that the first in line is actually better. So yeah, that's very important. The transparency.
And you overlay that with the risk management factor. If we don't do this first, then we risk XYZ. And so that's why we have this priority. So it's a wonderful tool. It's just more a matter of getting it enculturated and evangelized a bit. But the examples that you guys have through the wealth of content in the last 3 weeks shows the importance of asset management. And asset management used to be, I remember at McDonald's, it was considered, we would say new store development was the most important thing, because that's the new restaurants, the new shiny objects. Those were the important things. The asset management, that's the black hole stuff. We would call ourselves, they were the golden child, the restaurant development people, the asset management people. We were the adopted children. And when I was in the excess property world, which might be some of the personal stuff, I don't want to say, but we called ourselves the bastard children that everybody wanted to forget. So what we're doing is making asset management the golden children. And I love also the concept of the using the IFRS fair value descriptors for the assets so that we really value them. Sometimes that's enfolded in goodwill and other hidden intangible assets, but making it come out so that you can see it. Making everybody a winner is what this is all about, isn't it?
Can I suggest, there's always too much good discussion, or more than we can handle, or more than we have time for. But I'd like to, I think, maybe give everybody a chance to go around and say a few words. And I'm going to claim the last word for myself. But we haven't heard from Michael Hardy and Alex in a while, and Rich Culbertson has joined us. So maybe start with those guys. Alex, you want to go first?
Well, I'll go first. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Okay, good. I'll go first. I want to thank everyone here for allowing me to participate. Learned so much these last couple of weeks. Perspective of others is critical. Thinking that what you may do as the most important thing on the planet is very limiting and can be very costly. So I mentioned it earlier, just listening and learning from others. Peter, as you pointed out, seeking to understand first, that is so critical to capturing full value and understanding work can't really happen without assets of all types, and different kinds of assets interact in different ways with each other. And if you just look at one kind, you're being very limiting and probably very costly.
Hey, it's really, really great.
Michael,
2.5 weeks
your
or so.
your camera's not on. Can you turn on your camera?
Not where I am right now,
Okay.
but it's,
We can only guess. We can
yeah,
only
I
guess.
want you to guess.
Nope.
No, thank
No,
you.
I think your imagination's so much better than the reality. I'm just going to leave it. But as always, even virtually, this is the highlight of every year, to be able to spend time with all the folks that are part of ALN's sort of growing, fascinating family. I learn a lot from all of you, and I just I appreciate all the contributions. And every year there's some new folks I get to meet, and also the folks that have been around longer than me that continue to surprise me with new stuff. So that's all I get to say about this whole 2.5 weeks. Thank you.
Great. Rich, you got your camera on? There he is.
Building assets. No, I really enjoyed this particular discussion, particularly the areas of how asset management and accounting are basically joined at the hip, and they are. And I don't think you can understand asset management as much as you need to unless you understand certain portions of accounting. Some of the things of which I've done this week, is try to research, for example, how do you capitalize getting certified? Well, I found out where the IRS in the United States says, well, here's how you do it. I didn't realize that before. At the same time, recognizing that things like ANSI in the United States and the STM and some of these other corporations are 401c3 corporations, which are nonprofits, which means donations are tax deductible.
That's unfortunate that we lost Rich with a bad connection. Oh, but he may be coming back.
Yeah. The asset management. Then that you can save a lot of money, and also make sure the management you're dealing with understands the value. But the fact is that when this stuff is overhead has a certain stench for management. They generally want to reduce overhead. So it's important to make sure that all this stuff works in perspective. and to understand it first before you're going out and doing things, and where you don't have people trying to work with it, since because it's not advantageous to their careers and their unit, as far as the handling of a cost. But anyway,
Okay. I saw Danielle Ortiz was on, and he wasn't going to be able to perhaps join us for the later session today. Danielle, anything you'd like to add from your perspective? And if you're there, to unmute. Yeah, well, perhaps not. So, oh, there you are. Good. Would you like to share any thoughts on the last 3 weeks?
Well, I think that for me it was very exciting because we launched ALN Español, and as Peter said, Portuguese, Espanol, English, asset management is for all people in all countries. And then I think that it was a good idea, and Jim support me in this idea. And I think that we need to work a lot of things, and maybe in as we talked with Cecilia in December or in January, we need or we will have another meeting, another conversation to promote this initiative. And I think that as I said in last Tuesday, or in Tuesday of last week, that risk is the risk analysis or risk management is for me is a key, or the main key for asset management, because maybe all decision-making process needs to be with this tool or with this concept. And I think that in all conversations we had many examples using risk management. That's all.
That's good.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks for all.
Thank you. Anybody else? Jack Kelly raised his eyebrows. I think that was a yes.
Yeah, so maybe this is the next to the last word, unless somebody else wants to dive in. Just to reiterate a point that's already been made, I'm good at that. Every single year, our Asset Leadership Week has gotten better, and thanks to, I think, quite frankly, Jenny's no longer on this call, but I think she gets a lot of credit for getting us to think outside the box and to understand the benefits of having a virtual conference. I mean, the way this has gone, the way we chunk the time down to kind of bite-size events each day, and then have the Thursday at 4, chunks that people can tune into or tune out of, and recording it all so that people that couldn't be on the different events live can go back to the library and either rewatch, watch things that they weren't able to be live on, or rewatch things that they want to hear again. And there's several that I certainly want to hear again. So all in all, I think this virtual format has proven to be a really huge benefit for us. And super kudos to Nick for helping make the technical stuff work, and and Mike's got his little his behind the scenes skill set of linking things together and making a coherent whole out of a lot of disparate inputs. So no, I think this was just extraordinary, and I personally am looking forward to going back to doing two things. One, going back and rewatching some of these things, and also thinking about how we can use this virtual format, a little webinar type thing, to pursue certain issues that have come up during this 3-week period. So, I mean, I'm thrilled to have a chance to be part of this.
On that note, actually, just a quickly shameless plug, because of course the dialogue continues. And you're right, virtual is in that regard quite phenomenal. And some of you might know that the Institute of Asset Management is having its virtual conference next month on the 17th to the 19th. So I'm sure that there, some of these themes will be kind of taken further, and other ideas will come to the table. So I invite you all to try to sign up there too, because I think it will be a good platform. And of course it is a bit wider in the sense that it covers all sectors. But I think it'll be a perfect complement to the discussions that were going on here.
And Mike?
Well, I'd like to thank all the attendees. We have had strong support, and many people are showing up on a regular basis, which is very reassuring that we have established the proper program and created the topics that are of interest. And we look for the attendees to share their interests and point people to our recorded sessions and to join. And let's expand this, because the amount of work that we've cut out for ourselves, we're going to need more people involved. And I think we're going to be able to set up that workload in a way that directly benefits the people who are involved. We're in a really unique situation. It's a privilege to be involved, and thanks to everybody.
Awesome. So just two quick thoughts from me. And we'll have a chance more at 4 to talk more about some of these things with the senior fellows. But decades ago, I got an award from the NPMA for writing an article called Property, It's About People. And, that theme has come around, and it's, Mark's words and his way to express it, Mark Morial, is really excellent. And I think it needs to be at the forefront of everything we do. In a way, that's kind of what we're saying, is that this needs to work for everybody. Things need to work. And then I usually am the one that's not afraid to say the unthinkable, or the next step, or the step too far. And I think that, today, that is, that these ideas that we're talking about, although we're never want to say we're the theory of everything, I think we can say that these ideas have the opportunity to transform organizations and the very environment we live in. And I think that's a big deal. So thank you all. And kudos especially again to the organizing committee, which was Jack Kelly and Mike Bordenaro and Nick Kanoki and Jenny Zach and myself and our board give us excellent support, and all the speakers and the attendees and participants, a lot of people involved, and dialogue is great. It's been the greatest part of these. So thank you all very much. And until we meet again.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Yes.
Cheers.